kill you.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the initial episode of Zaku Talk, where we compare and contrast different Gundam timelines with each other and see, what makes them work or what fails in the process. Despite the name, there will be no Zakus in this season. We're doing G versus Wing, both shows very popular in the mid-90s. Both helped to bring the brand over to America and introduce a whole generation to Gundam and maybe even anime in general. I am your host, Patrick Scale, and my co-host is the lovely
Bob Skerry. Pleasure to meet you all.
Bob, what's been going on with you this week?
I've been trying to bolster myself forward with my career. I'm a voice actor, but being a startup voice actor requires a lot of both emotional and financial gains to be had before even starting. I've recently come across some of the financial. I'm trying to build up the emotional. But that said, you can see on my Twitter that I am trying to get out there more. You can find me on Instagram and Twitch, where I will occasionally post on Instagram. I will definitely stream on Twitch. If you want to find me anywhere on the internet, you can find me as Bob Skerry VOA. That's BOBSKERRY VOA. Look up Linktree, same handle, and you'll find all of the places that you can see and hear me, including my website, bobskerryvoa.com, where you'll hear my demos.
And I am, as I said in Patrick Scale, I run an independent film company, Quixotic United. This week, mostly working on learning animation to help create some things during this pandemic era. So I've been animating in the Unreal Engine, which is actually probably going to be very useful to film in the future, but we don't need to delve into that now. So, Bob, I guess sort of describe some of your background with G Gundam and why you were brought on to the series to do this season.
Well, I'm going to say plainly and clearly for everybody else to hear, this is just as much an excuse for Patrick and I to hang out as it is to talk about Gundam. But I'm specifically here because it is the only Gundam I have ever watched. And it was apparently one of the several pieces that led me into a very specific film industry that I'm interested in. And that would be tokusatsu. Tokusatsu is a Japanese word for live action special effects film. So if you've watched Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you've watched Super Sentai, one of the big names that Toei and other companies have in Japan, where you see people generally with themes, motifs, trying to fight a mutual enemy that is somehow threatening Earth. And there's a lot of that in G Gundam. There's plenty of motifing to the point where some of it is a little tugs on necktie racy, but it is still filled with a lot of great music, visuals, and motifs to draw individuals in.
Would you say, Bob, that your experience with, I guess, those medium and G Gundam or maybe anime in general kind of lured you into your career in voice acting?
It's funny you say that. I would say more so the animation, obviously video games and but it's not just Japanese animation. It is animation in general. I feel like what we cannot capture on film from the human facial expression and physical capabilities, we can get through people's interpretations and drawing. I believe in the idea of communication, and I know that my voice is probably the greatest gift I have because it allows me to communicate my thoughts as quickly and lucidly as I possibly can. And I try to keep a low filter because I believe in the spirit of what is being said as much, if not more than, the words that come out of my mouth.
So for me, I have seen all of the Gundam series, even the ones I don't like But Gundam Wing was the first one that got me into it, and for a while was the only one I had seen. But these two sort of feel so iconic, and growing up, it always felt like you were like a fan of one or the other, but you couldn't be both. In the early 2000s, so it seemed interesting to kind of put these two head to head, especially since they are the first two shows to come after they had sort of moved on from the Universal Century, and they both sort of dealt with that legacy in very different ways. So. Bob, G Gundam came first. As we go into recaps, I think we'll have you give us the first episode of G Gundam recap.
Certainly. I am going to preface this with G Gundam was actually the 10th anniversary series after Gundam had been begun as a franchise. And as such, they wanted to step in a completely different direction from the years past. For those who are listening in right now and have never experienced Gundam, Gundam is technically more of a war anime than it is a mecha anime for all intents and purposes. It tends to focus on the horrors and truths of war. G Gundam, on the other hand, plays more into what people were very interested at the time, which is more of the tournament style fighting and very ostentatious storylines of anime that most people tend to laugh at and make fun of and talk about 50 episodes for powering up, if you know what I'm talking about. The very first episode...
Well, just one quick sort of correction there, Bob. It would have been the 15th anniversary.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, it is 15th. That is correct. My apologies.
You may go on.
The very first episode has us watch as several different Gundams start shooting from different nations in space down to the seemingly desecrated and desolate Earth. It is, as they say in the opening, something that is relevant or relative to seeing a garden going into bloom. We see one veer off course from where it's supposed to go to a different nation. Each of these nations starts with Neo, so it talks about Neo America, Neo China, Neo Russia, and France. But we see this one veer off and hit in Neo Italy. We find that Italy has been completely ruined. It is filled with nothing but financially poor individuals who have to run away on hearing that the Gundam battle, as it's called, is about to begin. We see an individual from Neo Japan going about Neo Italy, specifically, I believe it's Rome, trying to search for someone that he has on a torn piece of photograph, and is being assaulted by both the mafioso and his lackeys of this town, one Michelo Chariot, and also by the police. Specifically, the inspector who runs the police has a hatred for the Gundam fighters and the Gundam battle that takes place every 4 years. This Gundam battle takes place because it's to avoid all-out war. Whoever wins the Gundam battle becomes the ruler of all space for the foreseeable 4 years. Believing that this Neo-Japan individual by the name of Domon Kashu is a Gundam fighter, he harasses him in their police station, shoving his face into pizza and just causes a ruckus until Kashu's associate, Rain Nikamura, goes to bail him out. After bailing him out, they're followed by 3 little orphans whose parents had died during the previous Gundam battle. They try to spend the night at a dilapidated hotel that had once been a glorious piece of architecture, but had been ruined along with the rest of the city due to previous Gundam battles. On arriving, they are caught off guard in an ambush by Michelo Chariot in his Neros Gundam. He then steals the youngest little girl of the 3 orphans in an attempt to take out Domon Kashu before the Gundam battle starts. Domon, trying to keep a stern exterior, claims that he's only going to go and fight, not to go and save the child. He is stopped by the police prior to going and saving her, but knocks out one of the people that's meant to watch him and his partner. Domon knocks out the individual watching him and his partner Rain in order to go and destroy this mafioso's Gundam. He goes as a lone warrior into this Colosseum, the Colosseum, to attempt to save the child. After doing so and handing her off, literally just for the kids out there, yeeting her at the inspector, he then finds his way into the Gundam that had veered off course at the beginning. His is the Shining Gundam. So the Shining Gundam and the Neros Gundam fight against each other in the city, while the inspector regales the orphans about why he hates Gundam fighters. He recalls 60 years prior seeing all of the more affluent individuals leave the planet after having desecrated it and turning it into a giant dirty ball and leaving everybody else behind. He blames them for all the pain and suffering that is caused on the planet. But after ignorantly trying to run out and shoot down the Gundam fighter in his giant robot with a single rifle, it's a really frustrating moment, we'll say. He is saved by the very fighter that he had been harassing earlier, having pushed his face into a pile of pizza while being interrogated. And then we see that the pilot of the Neros Gundam is defeated by the Shining Gundam by placing his shining finger, his glowing, heated hand on top of the Gundam's head. Article 1 of the Gundam Battle Registry, or what have you, states the destruction of a unit's head leads to their forfeit. So this is supposed to stop the Neros Gundam from being qualified to continue the Gundam battle. And one last time we see Domon trying to inquire about the whereabouts of this individual. After winning and the Miklo Chariot individual being apprehended, we find that he presses on his journey for the foreseeable future, while Rain stays behind to make repairs to the Gundam. And we're to expect that this individual is going to scour the earth to find this person in his photograph.
So did you watch this in the Japanese, Bob?
I've watched both in the Japanese, yes.
Does the Neo moniker, is that in the Japanese where everything just is Neo?
Yeah, they use the romanization for each of these nations. Neo America, Neo Japan, so on.
It's just sort of a funny way to be like, hey, we're in the future because everything is just new. It's like at some point everybody decided, okay, we're the new versions of old stuff.
You say that, but I mean, keep in mind that at that point it hadn't been used as often as we have in the years since. Also,
I mean, it's not even like if there was like a Neo Italy and then a Nova Japan and then, New America, but everybody sort of like agreed in the UN, like, okay, we're going into space. We need new names. What are we doing?
It's actually funny you say that. It is the universal century. And it's presumed that these different nations do abide by a singular regulation, a single series of laws that are kept in line by whoever wins every 4 years.
Yes, is it
similar?
You said universal century. Do you mean future century?
I believe I have the manga behind me from Tokyo.
Oh, yes, the manga. It like boils all 49 episodes into 3 volumes.
Yeah, it's awful. If I do have them, I didn't bring them upstairs. I'll do that for the next cast. But yes, I believe you are correct. I may have misspoken. It is the future century because the universal century is the original timeline. Is that not correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
It's interesting that they're like, all right, we're in the future now. Let us now rename. We'll be the future century. It's sort of an interesting thing that they've done.
Like I said, this was them doing a big departure from what had been happening prior, right?
Yes, it's sort of an interesting approach. And then just one last question. The Italian guy's name, is it the same in Japanese too?
Miklo Chariot.
Okay. Just checking. So on the Gundam Wing side, what we have in this first episode is also Gundams falling to Earth, 5 in total. We mostly focus on just the one, though we get to meet the other 4 by the end, so we know who our cast of characters are. The main one concerns Hiro Yui, trying to fall near Japan, but he ends up off course in the Eurasia area. Where he encounters an alliance special group known as Oz, and that unit is commanded by Zex Marquise, and they sort of do battle in space, and it seems to go okay. Zex, though not having a better suit, seems to, at least in this moment, be a better pilot, and so is able to kind of sink the ship into the ocean. Meanwhile, daughter of the, vice foreign minister, who in the case of this show is sort of like an ambassador to the space colonies for the Secretary of State of the Earth Unified Alliance, sort of heads back down to Earth. They get to see all of that event happening with Hiro and Zex. Then as she sort of walks away from the spaceport, she comes across his body on the beach, tries to revive him, but he wakes up. He tries to kill himself because he's been seen. Then the ambulance comes and he just decides when he can't kill himself to steal the ambulance, drive away. Later on, he sees her, or she sees him at his school. We're not sure why he's there. She tries to invite him to her birthday party. He tears it up and threatens to kill her. And that's sort of where that episode ends. So, Bob, let's talk about these episodes. They're obviously trying, it's easy.
I did have a question for you. You had the opportunity to question me, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So first and foremost, I don't know that it was made clear when watching that he was trying to kill himself with that switch that he tries to activate after being seen. I thought it was supposed to be just a propulsion unit to get him away. Is that not the case?
I mean, it doesn't. To me, I guess it always seemed, it's right over his heart. It sort of sends him thrusting back. It wouldn't be a really great place for a thruster. It actually always reminded me of sort of, right before World War I, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand is killed, the assassin runs away and to avoid being caught and sort of he's actually supposed to take a cyanide capsule, but he ends up throwing up the cyanide capsule. And then he tries to take his gun to shoot himself, but because he jumped in the river to get away from the bridge where the assassination happened, his gun was now wet and wouldn't fire. And if he had killed himself, they wouldn't have known what nation he came from, and World War I might not have happened. So it always sort of reminded me of that, where he's like, okay, mission's compromised, time to kill himself. And maybe it's harder to tell in this context, but every time something goes wrong, he is very quick to try to kill himself. And in the next episode, he's going to try to destroy the Gundam that's at the bottom of the ocean now, so it doesn't fall in enemy hands. So it's sort of a constant theme with him to keep the mission secret so that the people who sent him there can be protected.
Well, that leads to my other question in terms of Relena. My wife brought up the fact that the fandom doesn't like Relena. And to quote my wife, it's because they believe that she's just a bitch. Well, I don't know because I've not watched and I've never heard anything about the fandom before. Why is it that people dislike Relena?
I'm not sure, because she actually has the most interesting arc of the whole show, and also the biggest arc of the whole show. And so, she's not really great. She's not really cast in a great light in this episode, but that's sort of the goal, because she has so much room to grow. And there's an interesting character note where we see her, imagining what her conversation with Hiro will look like after he sort of abandons and the way she wished it had gone down. And, her conversation with her father as she's walking home from the spaceport by herself, wishing that it had gone differently, or trying to figure out what to say. So what we see is a girl sort of with regrets. We see a girl who wishes she could be a more active participant in her life, but feels that she can't. And so it seems like a smart place to start her off, because she's going to sort of change very drastically over the next, 48 episodes that follow. So, if people don't like her right away, I kind of get it. She's not sort of interesting right now. And they do an interesting, well, I guess I'll say, this is sort of going into our next segment called Story Beats, where we kind of talk about what the shows are doing and how well it works. But this show sort of does something interesting compared to other Gundam shows to begin, where Hiro Yui, the pilot that we meet, isn't really our protagonist. He's sort of does a couple things here and there, but we're really seeing a lot of events through Relena's eyes. And Relena, to me, in this episode at least, feels much more like the vehicle with which we enter the world. And so we're these people kind of living in fantasies and dreaming of what could be, and not knowing quite how to get there, or not feeling like we're powerful enough to get there. And she'll become a useful vehicle for us later on in those regards.
Okay.
So, and as for, I don't know, I guess in general, in my mind, looking at both of these first episodes, I think I have a sort of a conspiracy theory that most Gundam shows have very bad or very uninteresting or not quite there beginnings. I think, and I don't know why, it seems, just about every Gundam show I've seen for the first, 3 to 5 episodes is sort of like meh. And I don't know if it requires that much sort of setup for exposition to kind of get everything painted and get you into it. I don't know if it just takes the writers time to get in there. But it's sort of always been something I've warned people about. Yeah, you can go on.
I was just going to say, I think I understand where you're coming from, but this is very similar to something I used to tell people when I would try to get them interested in Super Sentai or Kamen Rider, another tokusatsu series, but very much more well-known, effectively as popular as Batman, but in Japan. What I've had to tell several people is you can't base a series based on the first episode. Traditionally, knowing that you are a television fanatic,
yes,
you understand the importance of a first episode for most series, right?
Yep.
Without that first episode being a hard clincher, there is no guarantee that someone will come back the following episode.
Yes.
However, I have found that with series like these, it is important to give them a 5 to up to 10 episode lead-in. Oftentimes these stories have fill in their entire cast. In the case of G Gundam, as you will begin to see, the very first 5 episodes are our opportunity to see each of the other individuals that will become major players, much in the way that I believe your Gundam Wing will show me each of the other ones that we were hinted at the end of the episode 1.
A little bit, yes. From a structural point, I don't, any writers that happen to be listening, I don't encourage you to sort of take this approach. I think for Bob's properties he referred to earlier, and for these Gundam series, I think they have an advantage in that, there's sort of a name brand recognition in there already, so they can afford to kind of take their time.
Correct.
So it's sort of a safe play, and the first Gundam kind of comes out of the gate swinging, but most shows afterwards kind of haven't. So that's why I think it has that advantage. When Gundam wasn't anything, they knew they had to come out strong, and then later on they're like, all right, we want to tell something a little different. So just something for you guys sort of following along with us. The first couple episodes might be a bit tricky, but stick with it. They go some interesting places.
I do agree that the point you're making is sound. The idea that these series get that freedom is only because they did have very punchy first episodes in their first or up to second and third series. So, for those who are listening, if you have any interest in trying to build your way into an entertainment career, don't expect that people are going to wait on you. You have to slap them right on the first episode. But once everything is established, that's when you can have a little extra lead up time, because you're going to try and be bigger and badder in your center and end.
Yeah, your audience wants your show
right?
to be good. So, they're going to stick around for a while until they find something that sort of hooks them. So for protagonist, Bob, right, we talked about sort of Verlina being our protagonist in the first episode of Gundam Wing. Now, we get introduced to Domon, who seems to be the protagonist of G Gundam. How does he sort of come across to us in this episode?
Domon Kashu in this first episode is treated more like a traditional hardened hero character that you might see in popular action films of the 1990s, the early 90s. But very specifically here, it's almost in a Clint Eastwood style. That's why the drop into Neo-Italy is interesting, because one could draw connections between it and spaghetti westerns of the bygone eras.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up. And I like sort of this equivalent to sort of these 90s action heroes, because, so at the time it would have been like, oh, awesome, manly. But now I look at it and I go, he's sort of a dick, and everybody likes him, and I don't know why yet. But it keeps me glued. I'm like, I got to know why they like him for some reason. So what's going on there? And he also very happy to ask anyone he comes across if they have recognized the man in his photo, even at very awkward times. When at the end of the episode, when he's got the guy in the headlock via the Gundam, and he's just like, I have one more question to ask. Do you know this man? When you first saw that, Bob, how did you feel? The
very, very first time I saw it was when I was a young teenager, just starting to learn what anime was. So I thought it was amazing. It was a very poignant moment for you to understand that this character is on a one-track mission.
Yes.
Find this person. We understand that this has some great meaning for him. And so we have to wonder why at every given opportunity, he has to ask who that person is. As a person now, having rewatched this episode probably for the fourth or fifth time, this episode, I can't say how many times I've watched the series. But having rewatched this episode, it's kind of silly how we get to see that, oh, hey, I'm going to force through this attack my computer system to make all his heads-up display stuff become a floating hologram of the torn picture. Not like a portion that is windowed for us. It is literally just taking these various heads-up displays and saying, hey, look at this. It's a perfect cutout version.
Yes, it's unfortunate. Anime in general seems to kind of overly indulge in exposition, and to a degree I get it, just due to the limits of what their actors can kind of offer via facial tics and body movements. But the show had some good moments where it was able to, we kind of get very quickly how the fighting works in this show, how the cockpit works with I don't think any dialogue. It's all visuals, and it's very important to get the audience to grasp into this because it's so different from everything else in the Gundam before and after, where it's the only time they're not called mobile suits. They have to call it mobile fighters because it's such a different type of piloting system. But you kind of get it instantly, kind of what's going on. So that was sort of a good moment. And you can kind of see other sort of interesting or get a lot of information about what's happening in this world without people talking as much as they sort of have been. So it was interesting then when they sort of really want us to know that he's after this guy in the photo and sort of shoving it kind of in this sort of odd place to put it. That was sort of my thought on that moment there.
Right. Well, I mean, to that, I would say, though, too, I think that in terms of, and I don't want to have us linger too long on G Gundam. I know that we have both series to talk about, but what I do like about this series, and the first episode really does help to hammer it home early on, or at least give us the proper setup. We already know that we're dealing with the haves versus the have-nots. We're dealing with the after effects of what the world had been doing at the time, a lot of ecological destruction, which it becomes a much more prominent point over the course of this story. We have this idea of what matters to an individual, because over the course of this series, much like what you're saying with Relena, is it Relena or Relena? I want to know now.
I mean, at least in English, they call her Relena. I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation.
But this character is supposed to be our vehicle through which we get to see our world. Same as with Domon. But Domon has an arc over the course of this series that shows that he does not have to give in to certain emotions that drive him at the beginning and allow himself to grow as an individual away from his one-track mind. He becomes a greater person. He becomes a hero and leader. But he needs the course of this entire series to get to that end point and to recognize certain feelings that he keeps away from him.
Yeah, so what's interesting in these episodes is that our protagonists that were sort of introduced to Relena and Domon, they're not very likable right away. And so sort of an interesting choice and somewhat bold for them to take to kind of help solidify, the growth that we'll get to feel later on and feel like we've earned something. But, most shows wouldn't do that. Most Gundam shows haven't done that. And so, I kind of like them sort of taking that approach and trying to make it work out on that level.
Yeah, certainly. Again, to reference the other series I tend to be more apt to speak on, in Kamen Rider and in Super Sentai, generally speaking, your lead rider or your red of a series will be very likable, either because they are able to take charge and press forward with the admiration of the individuals around them, or they show that they are a good person. They offer their capabilities and help young children to realize that they too can be strong. They are shining beacons of hope when people feel despair. Not so with these two characters in Gundam. We see Relena, who is a person who is introverted and feels that they have a sense of duty to family and to their image. And it shows that they have been stunted in their ability to connect. Versus Domon, who is in a similar situation, but instead of relying on being introverted and quiet relies on a very heavy sense of duty, responsibility, and anger. And so to see these two, I know at least in my series, not necessarily in yours, to see them grow in a way that helps them to not only overcome, but find the healthier way to handle their situations is something that gives you catharsis. It's not about the cool mechas and the fights and everything. That's a boon, but the story is about people before it is about robots.
Yeah, so what I want to talk about is, both Pilot's approach to, the legacy of the Universal Century that was right behind them. And, there were 4 main series and 2 movies and 1 mini series at the time that these were made. A lot more. The Universal Century has been explored since then. But, these shows sort of moved away from the Universal Century timeline because it has sort of gotten too depressing. And G Gundam in particular moved away from the original creator altogether. He comes back to kind of give story notes in Gundam Wing, but, still doesn't have a heavy hand in it. And G Gundam seems to want to distance itself from kind of the Gundam sort of talk and to a degree realistic robo altogether. And so doing so, they do an interesting kind of flop where in this universe, the colonies are actually sort of the wealthier people moving away from a depleted Earth, which goes into Bob's ecological themes that he was talking about earlier, where in Universal Century, they built the colonies to get rid of the poor people that were overcrowding the planet. So it's a reverse of what, fans have been used to. There's also, it sort of leans more heavily into what, it feels more to me like a kind of Yu Yu Hakusho as this guy's kicking and lasers are coming out and attacking people or stopping bullets, and Dendomon's catching bullets with his hands. So it's sort of it wants to create a different identity from what came before it, and really sort of stand out, from the sort of more low to the ground shows that came before it. Yes, Bob?
I do want to make a quick pause here.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to remember, too, that this is 1994. Can you recall what had become very popular at this moment in 1994?
Are we going to go to like Dragon Ball Z or some such?
No, I was actually going to point out Street Fighter.
Okay. Yeah.
Street Fighter 2 had been a wave of it had a wave of popularity at this time. It was on it was in every arcade. It was on every console you could have it on at home. This is around when the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo was taking place, and everybody had a cartridge, the second and third cartridges that were just upgrades of the original. But each of those fighters, each of those combatants were representatives of their nation that were generally a stereotype of their nation, and they had martial abilities that allowed them to do things that were ranged, generally wave or blast based attacks.
Yeah, and this is so what I'm saying. Yeah, they're okay with going in this direction. And I mean, the truth is that Gundam was made, or they agreed to make Yoshitaku Amano's show to sell toys to children of robots fighting. And he's like, well, no, that wasn't the goal. War is a bad thing. I don't want children to think war is good, and so I don't think we should market toys. And they say, well, we're going to do it, and, that's it, or you don't get a show. And he's just like, okay, fine. But that's why he sort of makes his shows so depressing, is so that kids don't leave being like, yeah, I want to be a soldier too. And there was a big fight, over the coloring of the Gundam, where the toy makers wanted it to be red, white, and blue. And he said, no, that wouldn't make any sense. They're fighting in space. It would just stand out. It'd be too easy to spot. And they're like, well, it sells. The kids it's more friendly. Your black thing is mean and menacing. So he sort of even had to go back and make
red, white, blue, and yellow, I'll note.
Yeah, yellow too, yes. So he had to go back.
I only say this because it's primary colors, which appeals to younger kids. And it's going to be stuff that will be more easily painted and taken care of by those who are willing to build the toys.
Yes. So, so he had to go back and was like, okay, well, this one, they only made the one and it's a prototype. And that's why it's these colors, because it was never meant to be a combat. But because all these shows are sort of spiritual successors, they all kind of have to be red, white, blue, and yellow, with the crest on their head, to kind of help indicate, that, oh, yes, this is the main character that we're rooting for here. And so this Gundam was just like, okay, we're just going to sell as many of these things as we can. What do all the kids like these days? And so I think your Street Fighter comparison is sort of apt, where they kind of went heavy into this, and they're like, how do we make this show appeal to kids? How do we make it fun? Martial art battles, laser powers, catching bullets, and like this is sort of what they do. And Gundam Wing is also its own cash grab as well, but sort of kind of feels more in tone similar to previous Gundams than this one, which feels more similar to kind of shonen style anime. Well, in my mind.
So this is where I also want to draw another point. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to draw another point between the two of these. I do believe that where G Gundam was more friendly to kids with their visuals and their absurd abilities, and also noting something that I didn't mention in my recap, we learn one major fact about Domonkashu. He is also known as the King of Hearts, and this terrifies the entire mafia group that Michelob Chariot runs. They realize instantly, besides Chariot, that you don't screw with this individual. This one will end everybody in front of them if they try to fight him. So he's obviously shown to be a very martially adept individual, and then on top of that, be branded this thing. You see this crest that shines off and on his skin. There's something mystical that comes with this, and some of the mystical will show up more as the series goes. But compared to Gundam Wing, there is a horror about seeing these kids in their initial scenes. Hero Yui is more than happy to kill civilians in a shuttle, which, as we find out after the fact, happens to include a person who is involved in the very Project Meteor that he is a part of. He is more than willing to plummet himself to Earth at great speeds with the possibility of killing himself because he is believing in his mission and believing in what he has been taught. He has no problem threatening a person that he may or may not know is the daughter of someone that is in major command of his mission. It is a terrifying thing to see this person, and then to have him be named Hero, even spelt not in the way that they would traditionally in the Japanese with an I, because the letter I in our Romanized culture would make the E sound.
It's actually two. I mean, at least I don't know what it looked like in Japanese, but in English, it sort of gets romanized as two E's.
They do that in the Japanese as well, which is why it's interesting to me. But on top of that, his last name, Yui, while a traditional option for a last name, also sounds very much like the Romanized U, pointing to the people who are watching the show. This is what you wanted to be, right? You wanted to be a person that pilots a Gundam, right? Well, that means that you have to also be willing to make massive sacrifices to yourself and to the people around you. Then you follow that by seeing each of the 4 other kids who made it to their given destinations, all assaulting people with smiles on their faces and being more than happy to kill people outright. And they're all teenagers. They are young teenage boys, kids, that are just killing grown people. And while it's under the assumption that it's to protect the Earth and to protect the people, it is still disturbing to see these child soldiers.
Yes, and it's sort of first I will say one of the boy soldiers actually has quite a bit of remorse over having to kill the people and sort of wishes he didn't have to.
The young blonde kid?
The blonde one, yep.
Yeah.
But other than that, yes, you're right. There is something interesting about these pilots. We get a little idea of their approach to combat with their sort of introductory lines, but other than that, we still don't quite fully know what it is. Yeah. So whereas G Gundam is trying to be as far away from the Universal Century as possible, Gundam Wing might be sort of too faithful to the Universal Century, and why some detractors of the show, might have a hard time enjoying it because it's giving them sort of a similar thing that they've already gotten, but it's not all the way there. It's not as well done. So it can feel a little empty. But yeah, war is not a glorified thing, and sort of the debate of war and what makes, what wars and conflicts impact on humanity is a high topic of discussion as the show goes on, and their approaches to it and how they'll kind of grow and change based around it. So that's sort of interesting, because and you'll see that, not all episodes kind of require kind of a Gundam battle where G Gundam is setting up to feel like what I call the Zoid problem, where every kind of problem has to be solved in a Gundam, which is sort of what the premise of the show is. So to a degree, it feels organic, but it's weird when the Italian guy sort of shoves the robot's hand in the building. He's like, we're doing a Gundam fight. And Doma's like, all right, gotta go do this now. When he could have just like crushed them all right there. And he even kidnaps the girls so he can do it. It's sort of very different from all the other shows that kind of came around it, but that's what they want the show to be. It obviously did very well. So, it can be good to do things differently every now and then.
Yeah. Well, I'll also say to that too, the point of it is, he could have just ended them all, but there would have been issue with him completing the task at hand, which is the Gundam battle was finally about to start. And if all he did was kill everybody that got in his way, then there would have been issue with Neo-Italy taking over as ruler of space. They have coded regulations. The second article in the Gundam battle regulations is you cannot aim at a cockpit because that would lead to disqualification for having aimed at a person directly. You're supposed to use the Gundams as automatons to take your hits. You do feel them. The suit that they have, the nanotech suits, which I love the way that they managed to make that the new system, as opposed to I'm in a cockpit, a more realistic war depiction. Having this be, I am a martial artist and I am going to be able to do what I do best as a human through this effigy of myself.
What I want to just talk about real quick is I would like some context on the interrogation with the pizza.
Yes, I was actually hoping.
Great.
So the interrogation with the pizza is actually based more on a Japanese trope.
Okay.
In a lot of Japanese crime or police dramas, it is presumed that in order to get them to talk, they need to eat, and they will often be given a cheap food source. Most often, it would be my mouth wanted to say yakiniku, but that's too good. It's a katsudon. Katsudon is literally just a pork bowl. It is pork meat with an egg underneath on top of a bed of rice. That's it. But it is often considered to be the, here you go, here's your food. I'm giving you something good. Now you talk to me. It's supposed to be a sign of we're on an even playing field. Now let's talk about what actually happened. In this case, what they did was they tried to mix in some of that with some of the more, I'm going to go ahead and say brutal police tactics that would be used either in Italy or in America, where they're going to say they're offering a thing, but use it as a way to hostilely attack the person that they have in captivity. So instead of doing a katsudon, because he's not in Japan, they gave a pizza. And hey, if you give me what I need, I'll give you all the pizza you can eat. Here, shoves his face in the pizza because, I'm just helping him eat. I'm maybe being a little rough, but I mean, who's going to stop me? So.
Yeah, for an American viewer like myself, it's every time I've seen it, it's always been a weird tonal thing because they want us to, I don't know, realize this predicament isn't good, but it just feels so odd. So I assumed if there was a context to it, you would know, and I'm glad you can finally explain it.
Answer that for you?
To me. And yes, the cop who changes his tune very quickly, despite having spent most of the episode telling us why all these guys are so terrible. Again, it's meant to help us.
Life saved from making an idiotic mistake of jumping into the middle of two giant robots fighting, using nothing but a standard issue rifle to try and cut through what's supposed to be one of the strongest metals in the universe, get surprised when a blast of energy is about to eradicate you, and then get protected by the thing that you were already complaining about throughout the entire series. Yeah, it's a quick turnaround.
Well, that was the problem. Like he needed to complain about it a little less, or he needed something stronger to turn him around. It was too hard. I don't know. Whatever. I get why it was doing. It's sort of a common trope.
We see him the one time.
I know. So you have to wrap it up here. You're sort of in a corner. Ideally, he just sort of talks about it less, but he's trying to set up why the Gundam things are bad for the Earth and things like that. And it's interesting that the space colonies, which look ridiculous in this show.
What, you mean Neo America looking like a giant star and having a giant Statue of Liberty and other things that are supposed to be
the colonies, they look like they're just like floating land masses with just like air that just goes into space, and they're like it's sort of an odd thing. But not to I know it feels like I'm crapping on G
What do
Gundam.
you mean? It's not like there's a giant ring that encircles the planet that is actually a force field, but it is made to look like a fighting ring.
I know. They listen. G Gundam really knows what it wants to do and just leans into it. There's a bravado in that. So it's just sort of funny to see it. But it's interesting that they don't fight in space when Gundams, at least traditionally, have been built to be space things, which is why they can be so big and have trouble fighting on Earth. Yeah, I'm sure they're going to get there. It's just the start on Earth is sort of interesting. That it was something I watched and I go, oh, everybody's complaining about how the Gundam fights always trash Earth, and I go, yeah, why don't they just fight in space? But
that's the point.
Yeah,
they don't want to ruin space because space is where the haves have space now.
Well, yes, and so that's again, it's sort of a flip on what it used to be, and so I find that interesting that they go in that direction. And then one last thing on Gundam Wing before we kind of go off into our drifting thoughts is that teddy bear in the opening theme that I still love 20 years later. I love that band. I have a lot of their albums. Very good. 2Mix. Listen to them. That teddy bear that teddy bear in that opening theme is actually something that doesn't get referenced until the sequel movie. It's a very deep cut. Gundam Wing was sort of this giant plot that they couldn't fit into the 49 episodes, and so they had to make both a movie and a prologue manga to get all that story in there. And when they
prologue or epilogue?
There's a prologue where you see sort of the roots of a lot of the main characters in the show. And there's a little bit of prologue in the movie as well, but the movie is an epilogue. The manga is, and then when they redid the show as a manga 15 years later, they tried to kind of merge all those things in one so that it kind of came at you when it was necessary.
I'm going to make a proposal since you've made that notion.
Yeah.
Because G Gundam has none of that.
Yeah.
So if you want to do this, I think it would be great to do maybe a live cast of us watching and reacting to the movie together.
Yeah, that could be interesting.
We can watch Endless Waltz together.
Yeah.
And record that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've done it before on the Adam Sandler podcast with Eight Crazy Nights, as it was the only way to get through it, as it is a very terrible movie. So it is possible to do. It could be something interesting to try out.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it's a good way to wrap up this run of the show as you continue on through the other series, I assume.
Yes. So, now we move on to something called The Way We Go, and it's just sort of where our thoughts have drifted based on the episodes we've watched. Some things where, that come to our mind that are sort of tangentially related. And for me, I own these on Blu-ray. I own most of the Gundam series on Blu-ray. They're put out by Right Stuff. Great company. Glad they finally brought a lot of these to America. Some of them for the first time in a home video release.
Turner, I know.
And, Turner is great. But the first thing I noticed is that it's really having seen these shows so many times, in their original, and sort of the DVD version or on a streaming version, the Blu-ray really cleans them up really well. It's very impressive, just the amount of noise and grain they can take out of it. But what it made me think of is I missed the old style of animation when it looked dirty, right? We talked about this long ago. I think you called it dirty cell animation.
I always called it dirty cell, yeah.
I love it. I hate everything looks too clean now. For some shows, it kind of works. But for a lot of shows, I wish, you would look at it as an option. At least just applying the texture after the fact. It just sort of, I don't know, I like that tactile feel to it. How is your feeling on those old styles, Bob? Are we just old men dreaming of the good old days?
As soon as we finished G Gundam,
yeah,
where the very end of the episode, they do a thing that I miss animation doing, which is they would do like a freeze frame, which was an awful tactic in the 80s and even some 90s, where they would do freeze frame and they would just stop on it. But in animation, in Japanese animation, they would do it as a fully rendered drawing.
Yeah.
And having like the nice watercolor vibe and the strong strokes of pen and pencil was always such a treat. I always loved that.
Yeah, I don't need it all the time, but even in Gundam, some episodes have done it, and it's always when an ending is like really big or like so like the first episode feels fine. There's another great one where these two protagonists in a sequel series in the original Universal Century kind of meet up for the first time since the end of the first show, and the episode ends there. So that's a good time to kind of go to that water kind of brush stroke kind of style too. So. Yeah, it is sort of nice to kind of have those approaches and go back there. But I don't know, I guess people like the cleaner version now too, or it looks, I don't know, glossier or something. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, so the way that I used to argue this, right?
Yes.
Years ago when we first started talking about it, with Dirty Cell versus Clean Cell, there was a transition point in the late 90s, early 2000s, where everybody started pivoting away from your traditional cell-based animation and went over to computer-based animation.
Yeah.
So you would have your drawing tablets and the like, and you would just use that for your backgrounds, use that for your character animation. And so you still got the drawings, you still got the color palettes, but they ended up looking so clean that it felt like a different medium than the original drawing styles. And the other downside to it is you can't buy those cells. There is a secondary market where you can buy animation cells. And I still, to this day, hope that I can purchase at least 1 or 2 G Gundam cells before I die.
That was sort of what came to my mind as I watched these episodes. What came to your mind this week, Bob?
Well, as I watched these episodes, I was definitely reminded at how much I enjoy these themes. I enjoy the opening theme to G Gundam, Flying the Sky. I was glad to get to finally try to sing along with it by watching the subtitles for the song, because I don't know them, and I just, like the idiot American I am, will just try to make the sounds as best I can as I hear them phonetically. I also want to make a note while I'm thinking of this. It was funny to watch both of these episodes. I watched them just before we started today, as opposed to earlier in the week. At the time of recording, this is July 4th of 2020. And
agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's humorous to watch both of these series back to back, watching the first episodes and be like, yeah, there's a lot to digest here. And you having mentioned the red, white, and blue during this, maybe it made it click. Oh man, it's great. But besides that, just the tangential thoughts of, wow, this series, G Gundam, really was one of the first times where I started realizing not only that I love anime as a general form of media, but also that it had so many of the trademark tropes that end up being a part of what you would call Power Rangers or what have you. There are so many individual robots that we'll end up seeing that are comically trying to represent each of the nations. An infamous one that we won't see until towards the last arc is the Windmill Gundam of Holland.
Don Quixote's nightmare.
Yes, it is. It is too true of a giant creature. But there's also, I'll talk about it again when we get to the episode, which will probably be another half a year from now. But I want to talk about Tequila Gundam. For those of you who have not seen this series, and even for those of you who only saw it in America, you know it is Spike Gundam. It is Neo Mexico's Gundam, and it is a sombrero wearing, poncho wearing, cactus themed Gundam. If talking about spaghetti westerns earlier, it is as close to a reference to what people thought was more of a Clint Eastwood character as you could get. But because it was marketed towards kids in the States and we didn't want to push the idea of alcohol on kids, they renamed it from being the Tequila Gundam to the Spike Gundam. The best part of this being that if you were to go to Right Stuff Anime and purchase the deluxe edition, which I hope to do someday, it's like $220 for the deluxe edition of the Blu-rays. They actually give you a shot glass with the Tequila Gundam on it. So if you ever are a fan of tequila, and I am, and you're a fan of Gundam, and I am, at least of this series, go ahead and pick that up. Get yourself a Tequila Gundam shot glass and sip. Do not take a shot of tequila.
So I actually, I also am a big fan of sort of anime. I think Japan, or at least their anime openings, are sort of handled very well. I think they do. And I didn't notice, I sort of first noticed it in my undergraduate when I was watching Soul Eater that was on Netflix at the time. And I'm watching this and I go, I like the energy that's here. I like how much it's sort of revealing about these characters just visually. It's sort of a kind of a great form of storytelling, and even just how they transition from section to section is sort of interesting to do. With regards to these two themes, I think Gundam has the better anime. I think it takes more advantage of the animation medium in its, visuals. But I'm not a big fan of the song so much. The Gundam song, the Gundam Wing song, I like a lot more. But if it could have done more with its animation. It really wanted us to kind of be brought to these, to introduce these 5 pretty boy pilots, but they're not really doing that much in there. So it's you get a little bit of an idea of what they are, but there could have been a lot more there. It's actually interesting that they kind of went that tactic. So the original Gundam actually was canceled, Bob, and so its episode run was cut down. From 50 to 42 or 43, and then it was sort of went off the air for years. And when they made movies, what made it so successful was actually the female audience, because they liked sort of the stories of this young boy and kind of his emotional up and downs as he tried to navigate sort of the war and a toll it was having on his psyche. And so, with the show trying to kind of harken back to the UC, their main audience was getting women to watch. And so that's why you have these 5, different types of attractive male characters and their approach to that. As for the endings, you can go on, Bob, before I talk about the ending themes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to want to talk about the ending stuff with you, but I will note that it's interesting that you say that, because I know around this time, it's also a very popular thing to have well-known individuals voice these B-shonen or pretty boys, as close to a literal translation as I can do here. But they want to have these pretty boys in a lot of anime because it's shown that a lot of women are really partaking in this type of animation.
Yeah.
My wife is a big fan of a series. Vice Kreuz? Vice Kreuz.
Vice Kreuz.
It's a anime about assassins who run a flower shop. And each of the voice actors ends up eventually taking part in doing things like singing some insert songs, and they have various picture books. It's a very common thing.
That's interesting.
Boys Over Flowers, or as most people will know it, Hanayori Dango, is a well-known romantic comedy, dramedy, really is what we would call it nowadays.
Yeah.
But you follow a girl who has 4 male best friends, 2 of which are romantically interested in her, and all the boys sing the opening and ending themes, and at least 2 of them are at that time male idols. So
all right, that makes sense.
It's a very common thing in the mid-90s.
I buy that.
Mid to late 90s to have done that.
Yeah, it's a good,
Sorry,
good
but
synergy
to
thing.
go to the ending themes before I jump in.
I hate them both. I hate the music. I hate the animation. I don't understand why we're doing it. I get it. It's the end credits. In America, you don't even now, and to a degree then, you don't even see it. It sort of scrolls over either the ending of an episode or the beginning of the next episode. So maybe they didn't, I don't know if in Japan it's the same thing, so they didn't put effort into it. But annoys me.
Sure. I know that I have never really loved the G Gundam ending, mostly because it felt weird to keep seeing Rain.
Yes, we just go into her earring,
into her own earring,
just like Mendelbrot. It is fractal of
it's visually
of her.
stunning, but the song that goes with it feels weird, especially because of that. Like, even though it goes into your traditional female idol song.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean. One last thing I wanted to bring up, because I thought about it as I was watching it, and I wanted your sort of voice actor take on it. In the English dub of this, that you're not watching, of Gundam Wing, what's always sort of been odd to me is that some of the voice actors, you know, are doing very different takes on their characters now than they will in about 3 to 4 episodes, and it's really bad and stilted now. And I didn't know if they were sort of get rusty, or they were getting into it, or they didn't read enough of the script to kind of figure out where these characters are going. And so Relina is one of these characters whose voice actor is going to change a little bit in the English dub, and so is the guy in red, Zex Marquis, the enemy in that first episode. His voice acting is going to change dramatically for the better, but it was just sort of an interesting thought. I wanted to know, I guess, you know, how would you approach it? What sort of happens in the business that would lead to that, and so on?
Okay, well, that's a good question. So especially in the 90s, when we were starting to see them try to get ported over, along with, you know, the advent of Sailor Moon being such a big property and everything. That's when we started seeing the dubbing industry really take off here in the States. The dubbing industry is often referred to as voiceover boot camp, actually. If you look at Funimation out of Texas, and a lot of the dubbing groups are actually out of Texas. Normal Animation is out of California.
Interesting. Okay, go on.
Or rather, domestic animation, I should say. But dubbing is much more intense for a voice actor, because it is not that they get to find the character themselves, and it is not that they get to interpret the characters as they wish. They have to take somebody else's read that has already been done.
Mm-hmm.
They have to match the lip flaps, so the people who have the scripts have to translate it and then make it work for lip flaps. The voice actor has to then see the lip flaps. They get the timing that they have to read it, and it's effectively like a reaction game more than it is an acting thing. But then they have to do the acting on top of it. So that's why you sometimes get stilted voice acting.
Yeah.
One example that I'm going to make that is not involving this Gundam right now is yet another infamous scene, the Final Fantasy X laughing scene. A scene hated by so many people who have played the game, especially when they play it with the English voice acting.
Mm-hmm.
They hate it because the context doesn't seem to come through as well for them as they start. And that can be in part due to some of the inflection as they go through the conversation. But the point of that scene is forced laughter. So when people first play through, they don't understand why they're doing the really what they've always called really bad voice acting of the laughing. They actually do the voice acting for that laughter correctly for the interpretation they have to give. It is a falsified laughter that they're trying to make themselves feel better with during this very depressing moment that they're refusing to acknowledge head on. That's why at the very end of that scene, they laugh at themselves for making the dumb laughing. It is not a snafu in the recording. It's ha 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 ha. It's blatantly bad laughing, but when they realize how silly they look at it together, they laugh at each other for having sounded so silly.
Mm-hmm.
In that same way, we see that these voice actors, I'm probably going to have to go back after we get through where you see your pivot point.
Yeah.
I'll go back and watch them back to back in English.
Mm-hmm.
But since I'm watching with my wife, and my wife is a diehard sub individual,
this is perfectly fine.
I'm watching both through in Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
But the voice actors only get the scripts handed to them as they get translated and cut into the way that will fit the lip flaps. It's not like they get to watch the Japanese with the English subtitles first through and then get to go back through with their own script. They have to basically get handed the script, get the general idea of what the sound is, and hope to goodness that they get to mimic it. Now, one last thing on this, because we might as well talk about infamous bad English voice acting. The first 2 or 3 episodes of Pokemon that have James, Jesse and James.
Yeah, I remember them.
So the first 3 or so episodes that James is voice acting, he has this more deep, throaty voice, and he sounds like a strong, pretty boy. He's mischievous and everything. But then later, he sounds like this.
Oh, interesting. I don't remember that.
That's because he was sick during the recording days that he had to record those episodes. So in order to make sure that the recordings got done on time, he just did what he could with what he had. Then, after the fact, not only getting to see more context for the characters, but also having his voice back proper, continued on with what is now the infamous style of, "Oh, I'm James." Sort of like snooty Taha mixed with, for the sake of the American audience, closeted, pretty homosexual boy. And it's great. It is proper for the character. And a lot of fans from back in the day have added that into the characterization when they do their fan art, fan dubs, so on.
So as a VO actor, are they usually getting, a couple scripts at a time, one script at a time? Like for a show that's already sort of completed, are they getting them as they're translated and then recording? And so it's like one, I guess.
They do it in chunks.
Okay.
When you do recording and voice acting, you are doing it in as few sessions as you can, while having as much to output, because there is still some processing that has to be done. There's a lot of post work that still needs to be done as you record. It's not done. I record it. It gets shot out to the people who are going to be playing it on Adult Swim.
Yeah.
You get like 2 or 3 scripts worth of whatever your part is. It's not very common to have multiple people in the same session. So it's very rare, especially in dubbing, that you get to have multiple people dubbing at each other. So you get to see all of your scenes, don't get to necessarily hear what your scene partner is going to sound like. And you have to do your best to match the reading with a little bit of your spin on it, meeting the lip flaps within a certain amount of time, not being too under, but not being too over. It is a hellish thing to dub anime. So when you see these first 3 or 4 episodes that you refer to, and then you hear this pivot, it's probably because those first 3 or 4 episodes will have been done in that first section, based on what they've been given. And then they'll get the next set and they'll be like, oh, now I see why they were saying what they were saying in episode 1 or 2.
Okay.
Now I have to inflect that from this point forward.
Very cool. All right, now we will sort of wrap up our show by taking a trip to the Nerd Corner. Each week, Bob and I will find something from the nerd side of the universe that we think is cool for you guys to know about. And so this week for me, coronavirus has shut down a lot of the big film festivals. South by Southwest is one of them, but they were kind enough to offer their shorts online for free, which is great because all short filmmakers sort of make these shorts to submit to festivals so that they can kind of get some form of exposure. South by Southwest is helping them out this year. I've watched most of them by this point. It's been up for a couple months. I should be able to finish it in another couple weeks. It'll be up until the fall, it looks like. And I found some great things on there, some interesting local stuff from Texas, some new approaches to animation, one particular short that was live action, I'm Happy I Promise, a very innovative take on a narrative kind of styling. So I'll put that link in the show notes, but please do check it out. South by Southwest short films are available online through MailChimp. Bob, what do you have this week?
So for this week, I will say that my nerdy thing, I'm also going to do a mini promotion.
Okay,
but,
sure.
My thing has been, I'm in my trying to gain more emotional collateral to be able to get to my microphone, which sits directly behind me for when I want to do my voiceover work. I've been listening to a very endearing podcast done by voices.com. And that's a group that you can go and get your jobs through. It's called Mission Audition. And in your having mentioned the show notes and everything, that did remind me that a lot of this week I've been listening to these 2 individuals speaking with various voice actors on how to do certain reads. and then they provide a false product, a false promotion that they allow voice actors to read. They then choose a few to have this guest that they'll have on listen to, and they'll give notes. And while some people look at notes as, oh, they're just digging into me or whatever, that's not how it's supposed to be. It's a chance to hear what other people hear when they do listen to your audition. And that allows you to have a better understanding of how to better your read. It's no different than if you go to the gym and you're having trouble doing a certain type of weight lift. You'll have a trainer tell you, okay, it's good that you can do this, but you're doing it with a poor posture, or you're doing it in a way that's going to harm you. Let me show you how. This is how it should be seen. And this is a thing that a lot of artists, voiceover artists, have trouble taking in, because we're all sensitive people. We have to expose ourselves in order for you to be able to feel the feelings that we give to you. So if you are listening to this and you want to be a voice actor, I would highly recommend you listen to Mission Audition. You'll be able to find that wherever you listen to podcasts. I listen to it on Spotify. Besides that, my promotion is go to foundfamiliar.com. Foundfamiliar.com has a bunch of delicious coffee, single source and blends being crafted right out of the center of the heartland of America, Kansas City, done by two individuals trying to make good coffee for good people with good art at good prices. If you go to foundfamiliar.com/BobScaryVOA, you'll be helping me out, because it shows that you've been listening to my voice. And then, as my gift to you, if you use the affiliate code VOXHART, that's VOXHART, you'll be able to get 10% off your next order. I highly recommend that you do so in the near future, because a portion of the money that you give to them will not only go to Black Lives Matter movement-based charities, but 10% that gets deducted from your order will technically become a commission for me. So help me out, because I'm a starving artist. For the love of God, I just need to eat, please.
Some fine copy there, Bob. Damn fine copy.
No, there's no copy. I'm pulling that completely out of my ass.
All right, and those, of course, all those links you can find in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this podcast. So I'd like to thank Bob for joining us again today, and we will...
Thank you. I always enjoyed being able to talk with you, friend.
I am your host, Patrick Skeyhill. You can find any of my short films or animations or audio things at QuixoticUnited.com. Next week, we'll be back with episode 2 of G vs. Wing. Thank you for listening. Good night.